כן. יש?
Thank you, Avner. I must confess that I was a little frightened by your first picture. I thought you were holding the core of a nuclear bomb there. The next speaker is two speakers, because our next talk concerns the topics, will our neighbors go nuclear? And we have two speakers here. The first one, I will introduce them both. The first one is Gallia Lindenstrauss, a researcher at the Institute, the INSS, who specializes in Turkish foreign policy. Her additional research are ethnic conflicts, Azerbaijan's foreign policy, the Cyprus issue, and the Kurds. She completed her PhD in the Department of International Relations at the Hebrew University. During the years 2009 and 10, she was a postdoctoral fellow at the Davis Institute for International Relations at the Hebrew University. Later, she was a Neubauer Research Fellow here, and now she lectures at the IDC Herzliya, and has previously also lectured at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I will already introduce also Yoel Guzansky, who is a research fellow at the Institute here, the INSS, and he specializes in the GCC and Gulf states and the Gulf security. He joined the INSS after coordinating work on the Iranian nuclear challenge at the National Security Council in the Prime Minister's office. He was responsible for coordinating staff work and projects, preparing assessments, and offering policy recommendations to decision makers. He is a graduate of the Hebrew University and of the Tel Aviv University. He is a doctoral candidate in international relations at the Haifa University. And please.
Thank you. And thank you for the organizers for having us in this important conference. Many argue that if one of the major reasons why we should stop Iran from becoming a military nuclear state is that if Iran goes nuclear or declared nuclear state, the neighbors will follow. And this will create very complicated deterrence equations, as Avner just showed you, and Avner also gave a very graphic illusion of why this is going to be messy and unpretty. We want to propose in this presentation that even if this pessimistic scenario doesn't materialize, even if the neighbors won't go all the way, we are already witnessing destabilizing processes, such as nowadays ballistic missiles arms race, a regional ballistic missiles arms race. So if we start with a Turkish perspective on Iran, for an outsider, and especially for Israeli scholar, it seemed as though Turkey was in denial. Turkey was buying into, or at least was presenting, the official Iranian rhetoric, according to which that Iran was only developing a civilian nuclear power, and that Iran has the natural right for even enrichment. And the reason for this is not so much Muslim solidarity or Turkish benevolence towards Iran, but rather, as I will present later on, Turkey is developing its own nuclear civilian program, and it was afraid that the existing nuclear powers will stop it, or that they will present very high prices for enriched uranium. So this is why the Turks have been so supportive of this. Also, when we talk about Turkish-Iranian relations, we should understand that Turkey is very much dependent on energy imports. 90% of the energy Turkey consumes comes from the outside, and Iran is #1 supplier in terms of oil imports to Turkey, and #2 suppliers in terms of natural gas. Another thing that will come up a lot in this presentation is that Turkey is a member of NATO, and it's a long-standing member of NATO since 1952. And if you compare Turkey and Saudi Arabia, this is, of course, a very sharp difference between the two, because Turkey, on the paper, enjoys NATO's extended deterrence and enjoys NATO's nuclear umbrella. If we look at Turkish perspective, what can be done with regard to Iran? We see that the Turks were very much worried of Israeli strike on Iran or a US strike on Iran. They were very worried that this would have severe negative economic repercussions on Turkey. And they were even worried that in a certain scenario, Iran's response to such an attack, an Israeli or US attack, would be also a response on Turkish soil. So the Turkish position has been all the way that negotiations is the way to proceed, and has been very supportive of the interim agreement reached this year, and has actually claimed that this interim agreement is a reincarnation of the agreement Turkey and Brazil managed to reach with Iran in 2010, which the US later rejected. Another thing that Turkey's rhetoric has emphasized in recent years is that we should strive for a WMD WMD free zone in the Middle East, and specifically Middle East nuclear free zone. But interestingly, with all this rhetoric, the Turks are not talking about the removal of the tactical weapons, the NATO tactical weapons, which are stored on Turkish soil. We have around 60 or 70 B-61 bombs on Turkish soil. And there, as Bruno mentioned, there's our programs to make new models of these bombs, and Turkey is has a very traditional position on wanting to have these bombs remain on its territory. So the talk about nuclear free zone is not on our expense, it's a general talk. Some examples of Turkish rhetoric. As I said, Turkey all the time emphasized that it's not clear if Iran is moving to a military nuclear program, that it has the most natural right to develop a nuclear program, that it has the natural right to enrich uranium. The Turks are very much emphasizing the hypocrisy of the international community. Both the states that already have nuclear weapons are not in the position to say something to other countries. And very much so, the Turks emphasize the hypocrisy in that nobody's criticizing Israel. That Israel has nuclear weapons and nobody's discussing it. And that actually Israel is in the strive for WMD free zone. We should actually push Israel for disarmament, and that this will create the basis for this possible WMD free zone in the Middle East. The strongest public statement I found on the side of the Turks with regard to Iranian nuclear program is one of the President Gül in an interview to the journal Foreign Affairs in 2013. He says that Turkey will not accept a neighboring country possessing weapons not possessed by Turkey itself. Now this is alarming, I agree. But just to give you the context of this question, the interviewer asked President Gül, why does it seem that Turkey is not taking seriously the Iranian threat? And he was trying to say, we're not underestimating it, we're taking it seriously. Now Turkey, like Saudi Arabia, as my colleague will elaborate in a minute, is advancing in a parallel way. It's both developing its civilian nuclear program and also its ballistic missiles program. And these two elements should create a possible infrastructure if and when Turkey might in the future decide to go to become a military nuclear power. As I said earlier, Turkey has growing energy needs. It's very much dependent on imports from the outside, so it wants to somehow reduce this dependence. And so that's why it has embarked on this ambitious civilian nuclear program. It should be mentioned that Turkey has tried to do this before but has failed, but this time it looks more serious. And in fact, already these days, a nuclear reactor is being built. The first nuclear reactor is being built by Russia. We're a bit in a delay. It was supposed to be completed in 2019. Now it looks like 2020. Maybe there will be further delays. There was also a deal signed with Japan regarding the second reactor. And in general, the plans are to have 20 reactors by 2030. With regard to Turkey and ballistic missiles, we know in the past that the Turks have cooperated with the Chinese, and they have 150 kilometers range ballistic missile, meaning short range. There are reports this year that Turkey has achieved capability to produce medium range ballistic missiles, again with the assistance of China. But it should be emphasized that the Turks are stressing also their indigenous work on this project. And we also know that Prime Minister Erdogan, has instructed the defense industry to make plans to build a long-range and even intercontinental ballistic missiles. Now, this is one program, but again, to put it in context and in growing Turkish independence, Turkey also has its satellite program. Turkey also is planning on acquiring and later on producing ballistic missiles defense. So this is all in this very general context of Turkey's growing independent foreign policy ambitions. How can Turkey be stopped from becoming nuclear? So first of all, there is a good basis. I mean, we know that Turkey is a NATO member, and but as mentioned here by Patricia, by Bruno, by the previous panel, it's very difficult. Extended deterrence has its difficulties, so it's difficult to reassure Turkey in this respect. But Bruno is also right that maybe it's not a question of reassurance. Maybe it's also a question of pressures. And I would argue that NATO still has quite a lot of leverage over Turkey, and that this leverage can be used to pressure Turkey not to go nuclear. And I would say also that the situation in Ukraine somehow brings us back to the Cold War context, in which it's clear to Turkey where its interests perhaps lie. If Iran remains a threshold state, no problem, Turkey will not go nuclear. But the question is, of course, the bigger question is what if it will be a declared nuclear state? And here the question is open. I would say the question is open, but we should look at NATO-Turkey relations as a very important indicator on where Turkey is going. So thank you.
Well, the view from Riyadh is a bit different than the view from Ankara. Well, despite its wealth and status in the Middle East and in the Muslim world, Saudi Arabia operates out of a deep sense of vulnerability. In Riyadh's view, a nuclear-capable Iran could dictate Gulf agenda, not less, including oil markets as well as incite the Shia in Saudi Arabia, Eastern Province, as elsewhere in the Gulf, in Bahrain, for example, undermine the kingdom's status in the Muslim world, as well as the royal family grip on power. And the paradox is that, in many ways, Riyadh sees some of those negative outcomes also in a possible US-Iranian future deal. In that regard, the declaration from Riyadh supporting the negotiation should have been taken as face value. Riyadh is concerned by the specter of a strong US-Iran relations resulting from a permanent agreement on the nuclear issue, which would strengthen Iran's posture in the region. In the meantime, however, Iran's upper hand in the region and the new smiling president in Tehran can actually lead Saudi Arabia, for lack of any other good option, actually to hedge closer to Iran in a measured fashion. What the Saudis are doing to avoid a nuclear Iran? Well, first of all, they try to pressure Washington the best that they can to deal more forcibly with Tehran in order to prevent it from becoming a nuclear state. Nonetheless, the nuclear threats coming out of Riyadh, especially since 2011, threats that are meant to pressure Washington, are not to be taken lightly. Given Riyadh's past involvement, of course, we all remember, with the Pakistani program and its military inferiority to Tehran, it might strive for a nuclear deterrent of its own. So what is this Saudi rhetoric that I'm talking about? In a series of unprecedented statements on the nuclear question since 2011, Saudi Arabia officials and former officials declared its willingness to consider the nuclear road if the international community is unsuccessful in stopping Iran. Only a month ago, Prince Turki Al Faisal declared, and I quote, "The Gulf states should work on acquiring nuclear know-how to balance any threat from Iran. The Saudis' negative view of Iran shouldn't be a surprise, and was revealed in WikiLeaks documents a few years back, which indicated how threatened the Saudis feel by any Iranian possible nuclear breakout. Particularly noteworthy is the comment by the Saudi king himself, King Abdullah, who asked the U.S. to cut the head of the Iranian snake. As Gallia mentioned, like the Turks, the Saudis as well are pushing also in parallel a civilian program and accelerating their independent nuclear development. This program in Saudi Arabia is perhaps the largest development project in the kingdom history. The Saudis, of course, claim that the program is aimed at meeting energy needs and reducing their dependence on oil. The world's largest proven oil reserve and the world's largest oil exporter, Saudi Arabia, signed agreements in the last 3 years on nuclear cooperation with the South Korean, of course, the US, France, Russia, and last but not least, China. In 2010, King Abdullah established a national body for nuclear R&D. He also stated that Riyadh would invest over $100 billion to establish, listen to this, 16 nuclear reactors by the year 2030, with the first 2 reactors set to be connected to the grid by 2020. Also, we can see, as Gallia mentioned, ballistic missile endeavor in Saudi Arabia. You can see the picture here from a parade a month ago in Khafir al-Batan in the north of the kingdom, presenting for the first time the old Chinese missile, the CSS-2. They were outdated, those missiles, when the Saudis purchased them in the late 80s, beginning of the 90s, and it was only a matter of time until they would seek to replace them or to add a more modern missiles to their arsenal. It was indeed recently reported in open sources that Saudi Arabia indeed began to purchase a more advanced Chinese missile, the CSS-5 or the DF-21 surface-to-surface missile. It's a two-stage ballistic missile that uses solid fuel, which shortens the launch preparation time and makes maintenance very easy, and this is important, of course, for the Saudis. It is also possible that the Saudis have purchased other missiles in addition to the DF-21, including other models produced in China, such as the DF-11 or the DF-15, or other Pakistani-made missiles. Well, will the Saudis go and choose the nuclear route? Over the years, an American nuclear umbrella seemed preferable in Riyadh. Nonetheless, the consequences of nuclear weapons in Iranian hands and the doubts that Riyadh have regarding the U.S., doubts that actually increased in recent years, might change Saudi calculations. In a case of an Iranian breakout, the Saudis won't wait long. More than any other Middle East country, Saudi Arabia has an ideological and strategic motive to obtain nuclear weapons to balance Iran. And they also possess an economic ability to do so. What that means? Well, some suggest, for example, Gary Seymour was here a few months back, and I asked him about this. He said that some sort of Pakistani extended deterrence may be allowing Pakistan to station nuclear weapons on Saudi territory could be one of the things that we're going to see. Another thing that is very important is American assurances and credibility for the Turks and for the Saudis. And as Gallia mentioned, it's not only assurances, it's only pressure. And if the Saudis will think about going their own in the nuclear route, an enormous American pressure will face them, and also the Americans will pressure Pakistan not to follow through any commitment it have or hasn't have with Saudi Arabia. Both states, both Turkey and Saudi Arabia, rely on U.S. informal guarantees. They don't have formal guarantees with the U.S. Of course, the Turks are in NATO. In the Saudi Arabia, it's a different case. And, of course, U.S. pressure. But both countries are worried of signs of U.S. Problems with credibility, especially if we talk about this, what happened in Syria and what happened with Iran, the red lines, etc., etc. To conclude, civilian programs in both countries, in Turkey and in Saudi Arabia, can create a possible infrastructure, know-how, in the very long term, but still those programs moving really slow. In Turkey, it's a bit faster than in Saudi Arabia. The Saudis now only beginning to search for places where they want to build their reactors, probably along the Red Sea shore near the city of Jeddah. What we already see in both countries, in Turkey and in Saudi Arabia, it's kind of a ballistic missiles arms race intended to, in some ways, balance Iran, maybe serves as different purposes in the future. And, of course, the most important factor is American pressure and credibility. This is the most important factor that can stop proliferation and can stop those countries from going and choosing this route. Thank you very much.